In this movie, we will talk about job crafting interventions. As you saw in the article of Rudolph and colleagues, job crafting is associated with positive outcomes such as increased work engagement and job satisfaction and reduced turnover intentions. Given these positive outcomes, it might be interesting to both employees and organizations to stimulate job crafting. And stimulating job crafting is what is done in job crafting interventions. Okay, so what is a job crafting intervention? Like I just told you, job crafting interventions aim to stimulate job crafting by learning individuals how they can apply the job crafting strategies as we saw them in their job. And why are there job crafting interventions? Yeah, because when people successfully learn how to craft their job, they will craft more and their job will become more motivating in that job crafting will improve well-being, work-related attitudes or behavior, according to Van Bellen. And how do job crafting interventions work? Well, there are actually two kinds of job crafting interventions, namely face-to-face job crafting interventions and electronic job crafting interventions. And we will discuss each type of intervention on the following slides. First, we have the face-to-face job crafting interventions. So far, face-to-face interventions are actually the common way to stimulate job crafting. And when thinking of face-to-face interventions, you can actually think of a kind of a workshop in which a small group of people comes together and sit around a table to learn together about job crafting and to make exercises on job crafting, to inspire each other and so on. All with the aim to apply job crafting in their job. And yeah, of course, they don't have to do this on their own. No, there is an instructor who guides the participants through the theory on job crafting and all the exercises. Okay, this slide shows you the content of face-to-face interventions. In general, job crafting interventions consist of 4 stages in which participants of the intervention get job crafting related information and engage in job crafting exercises. In the first stage, one conducts interviews with employees and relevant stakeholders to better fit the workshop with the specific needs of the organization and/or the employees. And for instance, when there will be a job crafting intervention with nurses working in a hospital, one can conduct some interviews with some nurses to get better insights into the specific job characteristics of this occupation. Then the second step is typically a face-to-face workshop provided to a small group of participants by an instructor who is an expert in job crafting. The actual content of this workshop differs across interventions. Most of the workshops are based on resource job crafting, in which participants have to make an overview of their job demands and job resources, whereas others build upon the role job crafting, which starts with exercises to visualize potential person job fits or misfits. Although the content across the workshops is different, they all consist of a lot of interactive exercises and they all result in the personal job crafting plan. In this personal job crafting plan, participants set up on average 4 job crafting goals, and for instance, participants might have the goal to ask feedback at his supervisor on his functioning. Next, the third stage embraces a period of on average 4 weeks in which participants try to attain the job crafting goals they have set up in their job crafting plan. And then finally, the intervention ends with a reflection or evaluation workshop. So the participant learned about job crafting, they set up their own job crafting goals, and they try to attain these goals. Did they attain their goals or not, and why? Are the questions that are central in this reflection workshop. More specifically, participants are asked to think about and share their successes, problems, solutions, and future steps regarding job crafting. This slide gives a brief overview of the most important pros and cons regarding face-to-face job crafting interventions. First, the pros. And so from empirical research, we know that face-to-face interventions are effective in stimulating job crafting. In other words, participants of a job crafting intervention will engage more in job crafting after following the intervention compared to before the intervention. We also know that face-to-face job crafting interventions do not only have positive effects on job crafting itself, but also on other outcomes. As we saw earlier, job crafting is positively related to well-being and performance, and thus, when people engage more in job crafting, they will also this will also have a positive influence on their well-being and their performance. Then, let's move on to the negative aspects of the face-to-face job crafting interventions. In general, these face-to-face interventions are very time-consuming. A recent study, for instance, used an intervention that lasts for 330 minutes. In addition, these workshops are very interactive and therefore allow only a small number of participants at the same time. Most workshops only allow 12 to 15 participants. And so if you have an organization in which 60 employees want to follow a job crafting intervention, you have to give each workshop and thus the job crafting plan workshop and the reflection workshop 4 times when you allow 15 participants in each workshop. Finally, these face-to-face workshops are also relatively expensive, and during these workshops, a trainer needs to be present and paid, and generally, employees following the training during the working hours without being productive during the time of their attendance. And so they sit there, but yeah, they can't really work. So to summarize, although the face-to-face job crafting interventions are effective in stimulating job crafting, they also have some drawbacks. And given these drawbacks, researchers have started to look for alternatives to handle the drawbacks, and for instance by electronic job crafting interventions. And that brings us to the electronic job crafting interventions. What I will show you on the next slides concerns my own research. In fact, we were actually the first that came up with the idea to develop and test the effectiveness of an electronic job crafting intervention as a less time-consuming and less expensive alternative to face-to-face job crafting interventions. How we developed and tested is shown on the next slides. Let us start with the development of the electronic job crafting intervention. So, an electronic job crafting intervention is based on the same stages of face-to-face job crafting interventions, but is conducted completely online via a website or an app. This means that people do not longer come together and sit around a table, but follow the intervention completely individually and online. First of all, you should, and you probably experience this now with all online courses, that the electronic learning environment of the electronic intervention is not the same as a traditional learning environment of face-to-face interventions. More specifically, the learning environment of the face-to-face interventions is based on social learning theories, such as social cognitive theory. And this theory states that learning occurs as an interaction between an individual and the individual's social environment. And this social environment contains the instructor and the other participants. And so more in general, face-to-face job crafting interventions are based on learning via social support from and investigative dialogues with the instructor and the other participants. In contrast, in an electronic learning environment, you do not have direct social contact with an instructor and other participants. And this puts more responsibility on the participants because there are now no fixed hours to participate in the electronic intervention. This allows more flexibility when a participant can work on the electronic intervention, and so that's something good, but also requires more discipline to start and keep engaged in the electronic intervention, and so that's a drawback. And indeed, from previous research, we know that electronic interventions require more self-regulating activities and thus put more responsibility on the participant and have lower engagement. And this latter one means that people will tend to quit more quickly. So all of this implies that we can't just copy-paste the content and the design of face-to-face job crafting interventions, because then a lot of participants will stop. And so we have to adapt the content and the design of the electronic job crafting intervention in order to keep participants engaged. And how did we do that? On the one hand, the content of the job crafting intervention is based on existing job crafting interventions and is further individualized based on action regulation theory. Action regulation theory really states that individuals themselves are central in the learning process, which is in contrast to the social learning theories that really stress the importance of the social environment in learning. Action regulation theory also explains how individuals themselves regulate their actions via information seeking, goal development, plan execution, and reflecting. A detailed explanation of the content of our job crafting intervention can be found on the next slide. On the other hand, we try to optimize the design of our intervention based on the model of user engagement. This model, among others, states that the design should be usable and persuasive. Usable means that the design is user-friendly, but also facilitates knowledge transfer. This latter one can be done by not solely using text to enhance knowledge transfer, but also figures and graphs, etc. And then persuasive means that the design convinces the participant to keep using the intervention, for instance by sending personal emails. And that brings us to the content of the electronic job crafting intervention. In total, the intervention consists of 5 different steps conducted during 3 weeks. In the first step, we aim to develop the global goal to craft one's job among participants. More specifically, this step consists of 3 blocks and only requires participants to read text. In the first block, we introduce the concept of job crafting by giving a broader definition of job crafting according to Van Belle and colleagues. In the second block, participants can read more information about the planning of the intervention and about their role of coach, since they coach themselves during the whole intervention. Finally, there is a reading exercise in which we give a detailed explanation of job crafting according to Radisnewski and Dutton. And so here we explain what task, relational, and cognitive crafting are. In doing so, we also give some fictional testimonies about how each form of job crafting helped employees and about how using one's strengths, talents, and motives in one's job is meaningful. This step lasts on average 15 minutes. In the second step, participants seek information on how they could try to attain their global goal to craft their job. In doing so, participants make a job analysis and a person analysis. In the job analysis, we ask participants to make a list of their 10 most important tasks, their 5 most favorable tasks, their 5 most favorable relationship, and 5 reasons why the job is important for themselves, others, or society. In the person analysis, we ask participants to think about their strengths, motives, and talents in general, and so not only about their strengths, motives, and talents they use at work, but more in general. And these steps last on average 20 minutes. Then the third step. This step guides participants to set up their personal job crafting goals. Here, participants first have to read an explanation on the SMART principle, and SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So they have to do this because the job crafting goals have to comply with the SMART principle. Previous research, for instance, showed that specific goals are easier to attain than vague goals. Making the goals SMART should thus increase the chance to attain the goal. After reading the information on the SMART principle, they were asked to develop their own job crafting plan by setting up 4 job crafting goals. 1 goal about task crafting, 1 goal about relational crafting, 1 goal about cognitive crafting, and 1 goal out of choice. In doing so, participants perceived a detailed step-by-step plan and were asked to fit their job characteristics with their personal characteristics. To help them, the answers of step 2 were shown again, and this step lasts on average 20 minutes. And then we move on to the second and third week. So in step 4, participants were asked to try to attain their set goals, and more specifically 2 goals in the second week and 2 goals in the third week. And then finally, step 5 is a reflection step. On Friday of week 2 and week 3, participants were asked whether they attained their job crafting goals or not and to reflect on the success factors or obstacles in doing so. And then finally, only in week 3, participants were asked to look ahead by reasoning on why they would or would not use job crafting in the future. And this reflection step lasts on average 10 minutes each week. Okay, so now that you know more about the content of the intervention, it is time to test whether this electronic intervention is indeed able to foster job crafting. So normally I would ask you to propose some strategies on how we can test the effectiveness of the electronic intervention, but now I can just immediately say it. To test this intervention, we used a quasi-experimental design. This means that we use two time measurements, namely one before the start of the intervention and one after finishing the intervention. This enables us to calculate differences in job crafting before and after the intervention. Because we expect that there will be an increase in job crafting due to the intervention. However, how can we be sure that such an increase is really due to the intervention and is not caused by something else? Yeah, we can't. And that is why we also use two groups of participants, namely an intervention group and a control group. So the intervention group undertakes the intervention and the control group does not. This enables us to compare the differences in job crafting of the intervention group to the difference in job crafting of the control group. And normally there should be no differences in job crafting between the intervention group and the control group before the intervention, but there should be differences between both groups after the intervention. So, when we want to measure the true effect of the intervention, of the electronic intervention, we both have to look at differences between the two time measurements within the intervention group and within the control group, and the differences between the intervention and the control group. So, and let's move on to the measures. So, which measurement scale of job crafting did we actually use? Well, we used the overarching job crafting scale of Van Belle and colleagues. And so, like I told you before, using this scale enables us to measure all kinds of job crafting strategies since it measures job crafting in a more holistic way. And that brings us to the results. Did the electronic job crafting intervention work? The answer is yes. Like I just told you, we can't just look at the difference in job crafting of the intervention group, but also have to take into account the control group. The differences within a group but between two time measurements are called the time effect. The differences between the intervention group and the control group are called the group effect. The pure intervention effect is the interaction effect between the time and the group effect, which is the time times group effect in this table. And how can we interpret this interaction effect? To do this, we need to plot this interaction effect, which is done on the figure on this slide. So here you can see that there were no differences between the control group and the intervention group before the intervention, and thus at T1, while there is a significant difference in job crafting between the control group and the intervention group after the intervention, and thus at T2. And this difference is caused by the intervention since there is no significant increase in job crafting in the control group, while there is one in the intervention group. Now we know that the electronic intervention works. However, is it also the case for the face-to-face job crafting interventions? And what about the effectivity of job crafting interventions in general? The recent meta-analysis of Oprea and colleagues tries to answer this question. In total, this study meta-analyzed 14 empirical studies that investigated the effects of a job crafting intervention. An overview of these 14 studies is presented on this slide. And I know that it's quite small to read, but when you take a closer look at the latest study, so the study of Verelst et al., you can see that our electronic job crafting intervention study is included as well. And then the results of this meta-analysis. So maybe first a small explanation on the information that is presented in the table. And so first, the K stands for the number of studies that is included in the analysis. As you can see, the researchers here make a distinction between different forms of job crafting according to Teams and Bakker and thus according to resource job crafting. However, not every study measured job crafting according to resource job crafting, and that is why not every study is included in some of the analyses. And so, for instance, as I showed you before, we made use of the overarching job crafting scale of Van Belle and colleagues, which does not contain specific job crafting behaviors. Second, the N stands for the number of participants that is included in the analysis. and the int stands for the intervention group and the con stands for the control group. Then G is the average effect size, SE is the standard error of this effect size, and then next you can see the 95 confidence interval, then the significance level, and then finally the latest three columns tell something more about whether the effects are homogeneous or not. Homogeneous means that the same effects are found in all studies, whereas heterogeneous results mean that the found effects differ between the studies. And so, for instance, that some studies found significant effects, whereas others did not. So here, the general rule is that the closer the number is to zero, the more homogeneous the effect is. So this table shows us that general job crafting, seeking challenges, and reducing hindrance demands are indeed significantly stimulated by the job crafting interventions. Besides job crafting, the interventions are also significantly related to work engagement and contextual performance. All these effects seem quite homogeneous, and thus are more or less similar in every job crafting intervention. Only the effects of reducing hindrance demands are not homogeneous. And then the final slide of this video shows us a table that represents the average effects of each job crafting intervention study independently. And here we can see that not every intervention worked because not all p-values are statistically significant. And so for instance, the intervention of the Maruti and colleagues, and so the first one in the table, is not significant. In contrast, our electronic intervention, and the study of Verels and colleagues, actually has the biggest average effect size and is statistically significant. So this shows us that a less expensive and a less time-consuming electronic job crafting intervention with an adjusted design and content and to fit the electronic learning environment can be equally effective or even more effective than a face-to-face job crafting intervention. And now it's again up to you, so with the third exercise. And in this exercise, we would like you to develop your own student crafting goal.